welcome everybody to another hopefully fantastic One World event. We can't thank Professor Reimers for being with us all these years, talking about the future of education. And I think in light of the most recent UNESCO report, today's conversation, I think is going to be a bit more powerful and a bit more urgent. But let me turn it over to, so we're going to introduce the project. And the idea here today is to hear from you and Professor Reimers and create another set of data points as we move forward in this conversation. So Lindsay, let's go to the next slide. And you want to just walk us through that, Lindsay, and then I'll take it from there.
Perfect. So our agenda this morning, Joe's going to give a couple of words of welcome and an introduction to the COLPs, as well as some of the work that everyone has done here. And then we'll jump right into the presentation. So up first will be climate change, then global competence, then technology and exponential change, then universal values, and then culture of peace. Everyone will present for about 10 minutes of time, 8 to 10 minutes, and then Professor Reimers will give comments and or feedback and or a little discussion for about 5 to 7 minutes. And then we will move on to the next. And then whatever time we have remaining will be a final discussion together and just some conclusions in that sense.
Thanks, Lindsay. So if we go to that next slide. So we've been talking with Professor Reimers about the future of education for a number of years, as we'll talk about in a second. But I have to say, it took me 3 times reading the UNESCO report before I really understood how powerful and profound that report is. And ultimately, last year, a year ago, we met with everybody on June 9th with the goal of kicking off what we hoped would be a 10-year conversation about the challenges and opportunities educating in the 21st century. And I think we have that same goal, except a little bit tongue-in-cheek, anticipating our conversation on technological change. And we're saying for the next 23 years, because in 2045, as you all know, that's the year Ray Kurzweil predicts that I'll be able to take my brain and put it in a robot and live forever. So I'm holding on for dear life. I will make that change. But ultimately, I think in light of what's happened over the course of last year, this conversation is more pertinent and more relevant. And we're going to try and create that broad social dialogue called for by UNESCO. Next. And look, again, this report is extraordinarily powerful. Our humanity and our planet are under threat. That's the first sentence of the document. This first sentence of part 3, stepping up to multiple overlapping crises that threaten the survival of humanity. Survival of humanity necessitate a radical change of course. And the report is clear, education is essential to that conversation. Next. I'm glad to say that we've been basically doing this kind, and so One World is going to commit to try the way I apologize, let me step back. The way UNESCO does not provide a formula for success. The document and report is intended to generate a global conversation, a broad social dialogue that will lead to a new social contract for education. I want to commit right here and now, One World, that goal will be fundamental and central to One World's mission. Next slide. And actually, I got ahead of myself. We've been having this conversation thanks to Professor Reimers for a number of years. First for 3 years at the think tank, then in person in both February and November 2019 with 60 educators from around the world, and the last 2 times virtually. And we've been talking primarily about global competence. And as we headed into December of last year, we wanted to expand the conversation. Again, I don't want to embarrass Professor Reimers, but I think a piece of pure genius where he outlined the 5 principles for educating for the 4th Industrial Revolution. Now, why was that so important to us? Because we knew global competence was an essential 21st century skill, but we realized that you can't understand the world around you until you understand how technology is transforming our world. And Professor Reimers came up with 5 principles for educating for the 4th Industrial Revolution, which we've tried to put in practice during this whole COLP exercise. 1, Start with the end in mind, global competence. 2, leverage professional networks across the globe. We've done that, hopefully. 3, create a laboratory of ongoing learning that doesn't stop. Create the data. You know, there's not a lot of data out there in some of the things we're trying to do. 4, use project-based learning. Engage your students. The world's upside down. They know how to use the most powerful tool in the world. You know, what do we have to offer? We have to offer a world where you didn't have all that social media in between us and other human beings. And 5, most important, collaborate in diverse groups. And I'm going to ask Jack and Mary to talk a little bit about their challenges communicating across cultures, across languages, and putting together their 10-minute presentation. All right, next slide. And ultimately, the UNESCO report, again, is just reconfirmed our commitment to generating this conversation about the future of education. And the UNESCO report raises the stakes and accelerates our urgency. I mean, and remember, the UNESCO report came out before the Russian invasion of Ukraine. So it's with a renewed sense of urgency and focus that we've held these COLP conversations. And the final commitment on the next slide is, we're going to do everything in our power to build this new social contract called for by UNESCO. We believe we can help transform the future. That's why we've gone from One World United and Virtuous to One World Future Ready, where we have 3 character-based global future-ready competencies: global competence, financial education, technology awareness. That's the last advertisement you get from One World. We're going to share our experience now. Next slide, Lindsay. All right, so now we're going to talk about climate, the future of education and climate change. This is the first set of COLP results, but let me pause for a second. Professor Reimers, let me give you your first chance to speak, because no one's here to listen to Joe Corvin.
The only thing I want to say, Joe, is that I'm delighted to be with all of you, because as you and Lindsay so aptly wrote in that chapter that was published in the book a few months ago, highlighting some of the work of the early adopters, the pioneers in the use of this report, you described how you intended for the One World Network to use that, which is exactly in one of the manners in which the Commission envisioned that this report would be used, which was basically to invite a process of co-construction with school leaders, with teachers, with school networks, so that together those networks would figure out what would it mean to take these ideas in the report, which are at a fairly high level of generality, given that the report is written for the world, and translate them into new curriculum, new pedagogy, new forms of school organization, new forms of collaboration. So I think all of you in the One World Network are really leading the way. And I look forward to listening with great interest to what you've done and to following the results of that work in the years to come. So thank you for the opportunity. And I just look forward to listening.
Thank you so much, Professor Reimers. And so ultimately, Jack, you just remember to mute yourself. So ultimately, Victor Nambo, I'm going to ask you to unmute yourself. So again, each of these COLPs had an English speaker and a Spanish speaker, and the Cultures of Peace COLP was even more applying the 5 principles. We had Chinese speakers, we had Mexican and Spanish speakers, and we had English speakers. So you'll see that in the Culture of Peace at the end. But Victor, quiero que me comentas rápidamente tu experiencia en la ciencia del cambio climático, hidroponía, en el impacto que tuvo sobre tu estudiante. Y puedes hablar en español. So Victor's going to talk, puedes hablar en 1 minuto, Tito, para contar esa cuenta. So I'm going to ask Victor to share his story on teaching climate change, the hydroponic in Mexico, and the impact that it had, because we have huge unintended impact on our students. Victor, please contar.
And excuse me real quick, but just for everyone with the translations, if everyone can speak just a little bit slower to give our translator time, just a reminder for that.
Please, yes, thanks, Lindsay. I'm a New Yorker, I apologize.
Hola Joe, buenos días, doctor Fernando Reimers, un gusto de verlo otra vez. Lindsay, compañeros maestros en México. Pues la experiencia que ya tenemos con nuestra hidroponía fue hace 4 años exactamente, y con la ayuda del maestro Francisco Narval de la Facultad de Ecología Marina, que hicimos nuestra hidroponía en la Escuela Secundaria General número 4, y los niños han aprendido a a cultivar donde no hay tierra. Mi escuela es pequeña, en mi escuela no hay donde cultivar y lo hicimos a través de la hidroponía. Hoy estamos germinando con los alumnos de
Víctor, voy a
nueva
traducir
cuenta.
rápidamente un segundo.
De
Entonces,
acuerdo.
y después cuenten con el chico porque estamos poco tiempo.
¿Sí?
But so ultimately, Victor, as part of his climate change effort, his school has become climate neutral now with the United Nations. But he didn't stop there. He wanted to create a hydroponic garden in his school, which he went out and raised money for that and made it happen. But most importantly, I want Victor to explain the unintended impact. Victor, para terminar.
Sí, y la violencia en México, como ustedes saben, es un problema fuerte y en Acapulco tenemos documentado a un niño que me mencionaba que él estaba ya inmerso en la violencia con grupos delictivos, aprendió la hidroponía y hoy gracias a la hidroponía es un chef en un gran restaurante en Acapulco. No puedo revelar nombres ni identidad.
And so ultimately what Victor happened was he basically was able to transform one of his students' lives who was worried about going on the path of delinquency, but with the hydroponic garden, got involved in that, decided to end up working the restaurant field. So again, the teaching of climate change, engage his student in a real world solution and engage him in the good side of life. Thank you, Victor. Muchas gracias. So Victor and I did the climate change. Let's go to the presentation. So the results you're about to see are from Victor and myself. And again, we'll go through these quickly. So the first thing was, what is climate change? There's a lot of talk about it, but obviously it's greenhouse gas emissions. And this is what the UNESCO was very categorical. They didn't pull any punches here. Curriculum must embrace an ecological understanding of humanity that rebalances the way we relate to the earth as a living planet and our singular home. You know, Elon Musk, he might get us to Mars at some point in time, but right now, the planet Earth is our singular home. All right, next slide. And ultimately, the climate change challenge refers to the fact that with industrial advancement, we're heating the Earth through greenhouse gas emissions. Next, again, we'll go through quickly. Our survey results basically were pretty positive. Most of the teachers, this is just we won't be able to look at the slide, but this is the way we did it. Most teachers, for example, felt that they were strongly agreed that they provide numerous opportunities to look at the climate change as a challenge. Next. One thing that's really interesting to me, so I used to work in the stock market, and the one thing you want to do is identify emerging trends. And it's very clear to me there's an emerging trend in the education sector. Italy passed a law that says climate change teaching is mandatory. In the United Kingdom, the UK climate change champion last year, Nigel Tomping, advocated that 5,000 schools in the UK sign a net zero pledge for 2030. And we're operating here in Westchester. We have a bonus conference on Sunday for anyone who wants to see us, where ultimately the Aspen Institute with President Obama's former Secretary of Education, Christine Todd Whitman, former head of the EPA, they came up with a four-part plan for climate mitigation: mitigate, educate, adopt, and advance equity. And we're doing that with our Westchester program. Next. And why are we trying to engage in the education sector? It's a huge 480,000 school buses in the United States, 7 billion meals. They have a huge, the first question you need to ask yourself, has your school measured its greenhouse gas emissions? If not, everything else is a joke. I'm exaggerating to make a point, but has your school, one, measured? How can you achieve 50% net zero, which is the Glasgow goal, the UN goal? How can you achieve 50% net zero if you don't know where you are today in terms of greenhouse gas emissions? Next. So I think we came to the conclusion our educators understand the challenge and are sharing the challenge with our students. And clearly this is a great way to help build global competence in our students, because there's not, every day you wake up, there's 10 things you can do to reduce your carbon footprint. Next. Now, what's really interesting, Bill Gates wrote a fantastic book, which we use in our curriculum. And he basically says we're going to require a level of cooperation that's unprecedented in humanity. The private sector, to my surprise, is getting very involved. Everyone, you should know this acronym, at least in English, ESG. environmental, social, and corporate governance. And every company that's traded on Wall Street will soon need an ESG score. So people that want the new generation, the young generation wants to have impact investing. So they want to make sure the investments they make are positively impacting the environment. And Mark Carney, former central bank governor of the Bank of England, right? You don't think the Bank of England central governor is going to be a chief advocate for climate change, fighting climate change. He is, and he made it clear. If we're going to transform our energy sector, that provides a huge commercial business entrepreneurial opportunity to solve the problem as well. So we need private sector, public sector, youth, volunteer organizations, all to come for all these solutions to come together. Next. Okay, Victor, I wanted him to tell the story of what he's done. I started with that story, but his takeaways were, one, he asked us to remember that climate change is a result of human success. We went from 2 billion to 8 billion people on the planet Earth in my lifetime. It's my 67 years. More importantly, or just as importantly, we've just had the biggest anti-poverty program in the history of the world. So it was okay to have 8 billion so long as only 1 billion of us consumed, but now 4 billion are consuming, and hopefully all 8 billion will consume. And if that happens, we're going to need 5 to 10 planet Earths unless we do something in the meantime. And the other thing that Victor Dichter, you heard, has been very entrepreneurial in his school. He's saying, look, this is not a problem that we should leave to scientists and specialists. The good educator has in his or her hands the power to change awareness and take action. Teachers need to exercise leadership to mitigate, analyze, and face climate change problems. He talks about the inequality, the need to advance equity, and it relates to climate change. The United States consumes 8 times more greenhouse gas emissions than India. And we also need to find a technology and universal values to address that. So those are Victor's takeaways. Thank you, Victor, for your partnership in the climate change. I think we're now going to open it up to questions, Lindsay. Hopefully it wasn't under the 10 minutes. So Professor Reimers, the first question goes, these questions go to you for conversation. So, how important is the climate change topic? How big is the gap between what we need to do and what we should be doing? And then we'll go to the next 3 questions, but maybe start with that question. How important is this as a topic? How well is education doing as a whole?
Thank you, Joe. I very much enjoyed this presentation, and in a moment I'll explain why. But look, the planet is on fire. The evidence is very clear that we are on an unsustainable path. When the commission was put together on the futures of education and the pandemic was not on the horizon, the Ukraine was not on the horizon, one of the main concerns of the commission was actually, there were 2 main concerns. One was climate change, and the other one was declining democracy.
Sorry, Lindsay, could you stop sharing for a second? Sorry.
Declining democracy around the world. So no question, this is a hugely important problem. But when you look at the efforts of schools to address climate change, most of them do that in a way that is basically about transmitting content on the science of climate, which is of course important, but it is insufficient to develop any kind of agency, any kind of hope among students, any kind of actual skills to be contributors to solving the problem. And so I think the example you have just presented is interesting precisely because it provides students an opportunity to find a point of entry where they contribute something. Obviously, are you going to solve the problem of climate change just with hydroponic examples? No, but it is very important to begin this education in a way that puts students in the driver's seat of their own learning, in a way that helps students understand how it is that what we're learning about climate change relates to issues that they see in their school and outside the school, and in a way that can help them integrate the various disciplines. I hope that what you have presented, which is exactly the kind of pedagogical innovation that the Commission hopes this report will inspire. I realize Victor was doing this work before the report was produced. But the idea of the Commission is, let's actually take stock of ongoing innovations and analyze them, deconstruct them, understand how is it that these innovations already reflect the principles of that report. And by analyzing them, I mean, go beyond the surface level description of what you have done, but ask yourself, so what impact is that having on students in their knowledge, in their attitudes, in their skills, immediate impact, more long-term impact? Ask yourself, what did it take to do that? By way of providing teachers time to study themselves, by way of providing teachers across different disciplines an opportunity to collaborate. What did it take in terms of maybe freeing some space in the curriculum, doing less of certain things so you could do that? I think that is the kind of analysis that anyone engaged in innovation of the kind that Victor and others are presenting today should be engaged, so that we can reform, we can reinvent the culture of education. Because let's face it, we're not going to reinvent the culture of education with little band-aids, little add-on projects that are basically built on the back of the volunteer times, on the volunteer time and effort of a few individuals who are extraordinarily committed. What we need to figure out is, how do we normalize this work that Victor did? And in order to do that, we need to figure out, so how does the organization of the school need to change? How does the conception of what it means to be a teacher, the very work of teacher, need to change? What kind of support do we need to provide? What kind of partnerships help schools? Obviously, the fact that Victor is part of a network of schools, such as One World, which gives him a community of practice, which gives him access to peers where he can present his ideas, he can reflect on what he's learning, he can be challenged, he can be pushed. That is all part of what we need to figure out, so that we can get all schools in the world in a position where they can be doing these kinds of innovations. My hope is that this experience, with educational innovation, there is always a risk of canning something good and saying, hey, everybody should just repeat what Victor has done. And, that type of diffusion of success has some value. It inspires people. But I think more transformative is if what Victor has done becomes a living process, doesn't end with what he's done. It actually, what will have lasting transformational impact in the school is if the community of teachers that he has rallied, energized around this project of hydroponics actually continues to experiment, continues to ask questions, continues to ask, how do we do better? Where did we fall short? What is the next step for us? And I think that is the kind of second order innovation or analysis that is very important. It's kind of going to the balcony and examining what you have done, and then asking, so what's next for us? Not only what did we do, what do we have to celebrate, but where did we fall short? What else do we need to be doing? So those are my first level reactions. But in response to your first question, how important is the issue? Hugely important. But what Victor shows is that it is possible to take a huge, seemingly intractable problem and turn it into a curricular and pedagogical opportunity for students to learn in a way I would be very curious, and maybe you can think about that as you evaluate continuous iterations of that, not only about what is it that your students learned, but how did their attitudes about the question of climate change evolve as a result of participating in that. My hypothesis, having read some of the evaluations of similar projects, is that your students actually became more empowered, a little bit more hopeful that they can be part of the solution. But you need to have the evidence. You shouldn't just rely on beliefs. You could evaluate that, not very difficult to do some evaluation of that. Anyway, so let me stop here so we can have a bit of a dialogue.
Fantastic. Well, listen, what I'm going to do, I think what we're going to go through each of the 6 and really open up the dialogue to everybody.
Is someone translating for Victor, or do you want me to do it?
Yes.
Someone has done that. Okay.
Make everybody that receiving in Spanish, please give me a thumbs up if you're receiving the translation. Alan, make sure everybody, Mexico, Victor. Okay, yes, so everybody's they're getting this. Dr.
Thank you.
All right, so we're going to go to the second one, global competence. And for this one, we've paired 2 fantastic Lansing educators, Kat and Ariel. Lindsay, I'll leave it to you. Are you going to do the presentation or is Kat sharing?
Kat, you should be able to share now. Perfect.
Okay, can we see my screen?
We
Yeah.
can.
Yes, we can.
Absolutely. Perfect. Well, good morning, everybody. I am happy to be here and I'm happy to see all of your faces and happy for you to join us. Ariel and our COLP was about global competency, and that is kind of a big area for Dr. Reimers, so it was a little daunting, but we worked with it.
He's a nice guy. Don't worry, Kat. He's a very nice guy.
I know. So let me continue on. So our connection to the UNESCO report in terms of global competency was in particular this powerful point, and I'm gonna quickly read it so it can be translated easily. A new social contract for education must reinforce education as a public endeavor, shared social commitment, as one of the most important human rights, and as one of the most important responsibilities of states and citizens. In turn, one of the key roles of education is to educate citizens who advance human rights. This entails building the capabilities that make students autonomous and ethical thinkers and doers. It means equipping them to collaborate with others and developing their agency, responsibility, empathy, critical and creative thinking, alongside a full range of social and emotional skills. And we felt like that spoke the most to the combined skill set and beliefs that go into global competency. And I wanted to highlight just what our proposal was as a group. We had an action plan that we were going to focus on how it is taught worldwide. We went through the work of creating a survey where we wanted to understand the depth of understanding. And we also wanted to look at current practices and strategies that are in place. We also, as a group, when we met together, we wanted to do work that addressed finding a collaborative definition of global competency so we could better understand it. We did look at and follow the 5 principles to serve as the model for design. And our long-term range is more collaborative work that will guide the development of a comprehensive toolbox for supportive educators. We had a survey that instead of rating our belief system, it was more about self-ranking. And so I divided our data a little differently than we looked at previously. I had them rank themselves and their school assessment of how they feel they are in global competency. And if you just look at the data, and I'm not going to spend a ton of time on the data, but the blue bars are the categories where people felt the most proficient in the expert levels. And then the green bars that are larger for the most part were where they were still felt they were emerging and developing. We had 3 different surveys that went out in English, Spanish, and Chinese. So the results are divided that way. And the conclusions are interesting. If we were to look at the Spanish and English participants, the ranking is very similar. They're a little bit harder on themselves than they are when they look at their school as a program. And then the Chinese participants, we all felt were when we looked at it as a group that they were a little bit harsh on themselves. But I do think that looks at their opinion of growth and how important that is as a personal learning thing. And I think that it is hard to rank yourself high when you always believe that there's room for growth. And in our conversation, we had participants actively rank themselves when we were in our discussion group. And we had about the same averaging, about 70% felt they were in the emerging and developing, and 30% in the expert proficient. So we do feel like that speaks to people's desire to grow and become more competent. We also looked at this global competence model that is featured in the UN website, where it has these different layers. And we looked at it kind of as starting in from the center, the self-awareness, kind of your innermost feelings. And then the next layer is that risk-taking, open-mindedness, attentive to diversity, that you can, that's something that's still internal, but it's starting to develop higher level skills. Then that next middle layer is the global awareness and historical perspective. And then on the outer layer, I kind of called this the action layer. It's the intercultural capability and the collaboration across cultures. And in our survey, we asked our participants to rank themselves. And we also did that as an activity in our discussion group. And this is, you know, lots of data here, but these are basically the rings from the center, inner, middle, and outer. And you can see the bigger the blue, the more people feel proficient expert. And it makes sense that people feel like they are more confident in their own self-awareness, their own open-mindedness. I think just as a culture of people who are actively involved in one world and these types of ideals, it makes sense that we have that open-mindedness and ready. But there's other areas for improvement, and we talked about that as a group.
Kat, can I just, before you go leave
Yes.
that slide, just for Professor Reimers' benefit and some of the, just go to that previous slide for a second. But in any case, so you're sharing results from 3 different groups. We have an English-speaking group,
Yes.
we have a Chinese-speaking group, and a Spanish-speaking group. I just wanted to clarify that we had about 50 respondents in English, about 200 respondents in Spanish, and another 50 respondents in Chinese. So I just wanted to give that background, just so you
And
see.
these are teachers who work in the schools that are part of the One World Network.
Primarily,
Yes.
yes.
The surveys were sent out mostly to participants and their teachers or staff that responded.
Yep.
So some of the survey findings that we had, you know, we found that the English and Spanish results were fairly similar. Again, China participants ranked themselves a little lower, and you know, that could be cultural, that could be that they're just looking for opportunities for growth. We did find that people had the highest rankings in these 2 inner circles, and I think that shows that people know themselves most clearly. When we did an activity where we had all our online participants, and just to let you know, Dr. Reimers, when we had our online COLP discussion, we were very fortunate. We did an early morning meeting, and we had participants from the United States and Mexico and China and Wales and Kenya. We had a really well spread out group of people, and it was so fun to have them. And we used an active Jamboard so that they could mark things. And so where I had them look at is what areas of strength did they have, and those are the plus. And what were areas for opportunities for growth, where they felt like they needed to strengthen their own global competence areas. And if you notice on the wheel there are areas that are very strong in the plus, and it's the inner areas. And then, but even some areas where people felt like they were strong, there were almost equal numbers of people that felt like that was an area to grow. And I thought that was interesting. The 2 areas that had nobody saying that was an area of strength, but a lot of areas to grow: intercultural capability and historical perspective. And I think that that's interesting and a place to build on and have a discussion on. And also maybe it has to do with needing to have clear definitions for people when they're thinking about what does that really mean. So then we did an activity together that was really interesting, because when we think about that UNESCO report and the call to action and to have a new social contract of education, we looked at that basic model and thought there's not enough in there. And so we looked for and had kind of a consensus, and I organized everybody's ideas into some real interesting things. And And then Ariel and I kind of worked out where did those ideas fit, and we felt like there wasn't enough here, so our group added some really smart things. Like we felt like, for example, growth mindset needs to be in there. There needs to be economic awareness. There needs to be that social emotional awareness. There needs to be critical fact checking now. There needs to be that feeling of commitment, that advocacy, and we feel like advocacy is an action that's important now. Language development, having that capability, that importance of that. So we added more things because we feel like this model isn't complete enough. And for people to become more globally competent, they have to be more aware of the different levels and things that really go into it. And then, so we did have a few musings, and you can look through this later. Lindsay will have the report, but we did feel like because the early models are not inclusive enough for for new social contract, that this would be an area, a really great area for professional development and dialogue. So just more clarification for people as we try to progress and become more globally competent to really truly understand what that means. And then the next part of our goals were really to collect some strategies that were working for teachers and for staff in teaching global competency within their buildings. And we also ranked it, and I didn't get a specific on this data about what grade levels, because what works in high school does not necessarily work for my kindergarten babies. So, and we had this is data from the survey about, this is kind of the ranking of different strategies, and some were curriculum related, some were just straight out discussions with students, some were social emotional lessons. So it's quite a variety of strategies. And so when we worked in person, we collected more, and that data I will share out. We didn't have enough time for me to tell you the specifics. And then our last part in our discussion was to talk about the path to the future, because of course we are trying to look forward. And this is just some simple data of what things teachers and instructors and people that are working on global competency felt like to become more, to progress further. This is what we need. Of course, time was number one. Time for collaboration, time for planning, time for training, outreach, making more connections to communities far and wide, and then also just some good basic skills and things that they're doing that they want to continue or increase the use of. So our final thoughts, because I'm trying to go as quickly as I can because I talked too long. So following that survey and our online discussions, which were wonderful, it is pretty clear that we feel like our COLP still has work to do. And we feel like that work will continue to focus on clearly defining global competence and its components. And we want to do that through the lens of the UNESCO goal of the new social contract in education. We also think it's important to share those best practices with educators and to create a toolbox of support materials and resources to increase awareness, but more importantly, to increase engagement in schools within global competency. I'm done.
Thank you. Okay, let's give Kat one more round of applause. Thank you very much. And her Spanish-speaking partner, Ariel. Ariel, do you want to say a couple of words before I turn it over to Professor Reimers?
No, I think that thank you, Joe, and thank you everybody for this opportunity to be here this morning. I believe Kat covered the core of the work that we have been doing in this group. The more that we work and the more that we go deeper into this topic, the more that we realize that there is a lot to do in front of us. But we are very, very excited to be leading this kind of work in our One World group. So thank you again for the opportunity and for letting us share the results of our work in the last few months.
Well, thank you, Ariel and Kat. Let's give them another round of applause if we could. And Professor Reimers, before I turn over, I want you to understand a couple of things about Lansing, Michigan, if you don't already understand. So Kat and Ariel, first time I met Ariel, He was in a different school and he had 25 kids line up and say hello to in 25 different languages, hello in 25 different languages. So Lansing's a refugee city and they see more than anybody the power of diverse groups. Second of all, you probably know in Michigan, you can go to any school you want. So the Lansing School District has to compete for their students. And every school in Lansing, Michigan has a magnet. And I'm thrilled that Kat and Ariel have made global competence their magnet. And so that's one of the things we want. We're going to go out there this summer and work, as they said, go forward, next steps. As you know, we've been working with you since 2016. This is a process that our whole team is really excited to get out to Lansing and begin to use global competence as a magnet. Professor Reimers, the question for you then is, we obviously think global competence is important. Maybe you can explain to people why you think that is. And second of all, what's your view on how we're doing?
So I totally agree that global competency is crucial because our lives are shaped by local events, which are completely related to global events. And unless we can understand those connections, it's going to be pretty difficult for us to make sense of our lives or to participate in our communities. So to give you an example, I wonder how many Americans have thought about the connection between the Russian invasion of Ukraine and freedom of the press in this country and elsewhere, and the implications of freedom of the press for the future of democracy, which, as we know, is at risk everywhere. And, you know, let me to those who haven't thought very much about it, they may be wondering, well, why is President Biden traveling to smooth relations with the Crown Prince of Saudi Arabia after he said he was going to make a pariah of a man because he dismembered a journalist that basically challenged his corruption? And some people might say, well, that shows that we have no principles as a country, that we don't really care about journalists, that we don't care about some of the basic rights, that we don't really care about democracy in our own country. But I think it's only when we understand the pain and the disruptions that the invasion of Ukraine is causing to oil prices and to supply chains around the world that we begin to understand that the difficulties of understanding these connections between global and local are difficulties involved in reconciling trade-offs. See, we can't behave in a way that advances a world in which the SDGs are the reality if we don't think about trade-offs. And this notion that we're going to equip people to function in a complicated world by equipping them with some dogmatic view that there are simple ways to fix any of these problems is actually unpreparing them. This dogmatism is one of the reasons why democracy is at risk in America, because we have too many people who think that you can just depend on religion, a very shallow understanding of religion, to conduct your life, and who actually believe that there are simple answers to our problems, and who are not equipped, whose minds are not equipped to deal with complexity and to understand, you know, there are trade-offs. There are trade-offs involved in advancing solutions to climate change, in advancing international relations, in deciding how do you value freedom relative to security. So I think global competency is of the essence of what we need to prepare people to function as informed and effective democratic citizens. You will see in the next election, you will see people maligning President Biden because he doesn't have any firm beliefs on freedom. You will see footage of his video kissing the hands or shaking the hands of the Crown Prince of Saudi Arabia. You will see people exploiting this for political gain. And I think it's only if our schools engage our students with a deep understanding of the complex systems and the different interests that converge in something like how the US relates to other nations, that our students will not be easy prey to sellers of oil snake on radio shows, which have caused so much harm to this democracy, right? All these vitriol that goes on, especially in our radio stations, in our local radio stations. Anyway, so with respect to what you're doing, I think that what Kat has presented and Ariel has been working with Kat is a great example of how a school network can leverage the benefits of actually being a network, of being a laboratory of like-minded schools that are willing to together produce innovations, pedagogical and curricular innovation for the benefits of the whole. And it seems to me that spending some time deciding on an agreed upon definition of what the outcome is within your network and beginning with some measurement of where do people think they are with respect to that definition is a good place to begin. It's a wonderful place to begin. I would urge you, I think it's terrific that you use that initial model to then, through it, read the report and say, how do we enrich it based on the UNESCO report? I think that's terrific. My recommendation would be that the next step is to go from those kind of high-level terms of various competencies and so on to developing more operational, clear definitions of what do these things mean? How do you know when you see it? Develop a, oops, am I still with you? Kind of, oh, here you are. Yeah, develop a way that would make it very easy for any teacher in your network to recognize, okay, I can now assess the performance of a student, at least on a simple kind of incipient, developed kind of 3-point rubric for each of those components. I think that's the next step, right? It's not to continue to enrich theoretically your model, but to translate it into a simple operational guide that teachers can use to assess where their students are and to assess the experiences that they design for your students. The other second recommendation I have, I think it's wonderful that you basically administer that survey to get your own teachers in the network to self-assess where they were. I think that the presentation of the findings, comparing them by language, is interesting, but I would be more interested in the presentation of the findings by school, because the segregation, the analysis by language assumes that there is something about kind of the national culture of the place where those schools are located that is shaping how people do. And there may be some of that. I mean, this is how PISA presents results and so on. But I think in your network, there may be some schools that are doing a much better job than others in at least producing high levels of efficacy, self-perceived efficacy in those domains. And you could learn from that. If you basically said, where are the schools where teachers rate themselves very highly? And where are the schools where they rate themselves very, very low on the scale? And how are they different? What are they doing? Because I would think that the next step for this work is to begin to connect this good work on the definition to pedagogical practice, curriculum, and in a way, connect what you're doing with the previous presentation, which was all about a particular practice, right? So these two presentations complement one another. The previous presentation was all about the pedagogical innovation, not very much of the conceptualization of the outcomes, not very much on the assessment. This presentation is heavily about the conceptualization of the outcomes, beginning of the work on assessment, not very much on, so what are the practices that you think are going to move the needle here? And I think you need all of that. And the beauty of a network and the beauty of a conference like that is that everybody can learn from others and say, hey, I should borrow from Kate. And I should do that now with respect to climate change literacy or climate change agency. And Kat could say, hey, I could borrow from the hydroponics experiment, and we should begin to codify the experiences that we're advancing in our schools to help us move. So anyway, really very interesting example and clear illustration of what a network of schools can do when they come together for the purpose of generating innovation, which is a lot more than you can do individually. Again, as with the previous discussion, it would be very important to kind of go to the balcony and do a second order analysis of the work you've done and to ask, what are the conditions that have permitted you to do this work? What seems to be working well? How engaged are the teachers? What do you know about the extent to which teachers are actually learning, changing their practice as a result of participating in these groups? What conditions in terms of time, resources, support from leadership have enabled that? What obstacles remain, right?
Fantastic. Listen, so I don't know if you guys can tell, but I'm furiously taking notes. And Jack and Lindsay and Rita and Marty and the Victor, please be sure to take notes. These are when I every so often for my children, I'll say something I believe is intelligent and useful for them for the rest of their life. And I said, these are pearls. Pay attention, kids, because you know they don't. Every parent knows kids don't pay attention. Less so my partner wife. But so when I have something I actually think is of value, I say I have a pearl. Professor Reimers is giving us a panoply, a waterfall, a cascade of pearls. And I'm thrilled we're recording this. We are recording this, correct, Lindsay? Yeah, please. You know, I'm always thinking of the absolute worst thing that could happen. So Professor Reimers, I can't thank you enough. This is really working better than I'd ever hoped. We're now going to turn it over to technology change with Mary. Would you raise your hand and say hello? Just virtually, and then Jack Sakara is going to do the presentation. Mary, please, dame una saludo, por favor, Mary. I can see you. Would you translate? I'm not seeing this wave from Mary yet. Well, anyway, we'll get there. Okay. In any case, and Mary, of course, Dr. There we go. Okay, muchas gracias. Okay, Jack, over to you.
Thank you. Lindsay, is it easier if I just can change the slides?
Lindsay's got it. You got it, Jack.
Good. All right. Well, thank you. Let me first thank my thought partner and research partner, the brilliant Mary Pelcastre and her team in Mexico. It was such a pleasure, really an honor to work with you all. And I thank you for that. Next. Lynn, so thank you. So UNESCO recognized what they call the unprecedented impact of digital transformation on our lives and certainly on our teaching and its role in education. So they called for protecting both intellectual and creative freedoms, implying a threat there, and calling clearly and numerous times throughout the report that digital literacy and and access to technology be seen as a basic human right to be achieved and then to be protected. Next. So our discussion centered around the impact, right? Explore the challenges that exponential change has upon the education community, right? And how we might be able to steer the converging technologies to the elevation of humanity and manage the existential threats created by it. So it's a kind of an abundance or scarcity, and maybe not too much in between. We could go one way or the other very strongly. We talked about things like artificial intelligence, genetic engineering, autonomous transportation and robotics and energy storage, and medical advances and the increase in the human lifespan and a world without work. So all of these things came up for us as teachers. Next. And we talked about the convergence of technologies. You know, why did Elon Musk say that AI is a bigger threat to humanity than nuclear proliferation? Right? So we have to be able to see that the world is changing so rapidly, it's really hard for any one of us to grab hold of it and to try to get some life lessons from it, right? But we're talking about life extension. We're talking about lifetime learning because we're going to have active 100-year-olds, 100-plus-year-olds, and even healthy 100-plus-year-olds in the not too distant future, right? We have total markets being wiped out by disruptors. So the transportation industry, right? Millions of jobs are going to be on the line. Manufacturing, by one technological advance, the 3D printer, the entire manufacturing sector can be wiped out. And so what do we do with that many people looking for work or unable to work who want to work, right? Will there be new jobs? Absolutely. And that's part of the solution. But we have, as teachers and educators, our pulse on the future, and we need to make sure that we help steer to a preferred outcome as opposed to one of darkness and isolation. So our survey next, I'm just using one as an example. So the question we chose as our exemplar is, our school helps develop a range of future-ready competencies in order to prepare our students for the 21st century world of exponential change, where they can be resilient, independent, lifelong learners. So upper left is the English speaking results. Below that are the Chinese results, and to the right are the Mexican results. And there are some lessons to be taken here. To that question of how are we providing a range of future-ready activities, the agree and strongly agree out of China was 96%, whereas in Mexico it was 70%, and from the USA, English-speaking teachers and staff, it was 67%. So it seems like the United States is not exactly leading the way on the use of curriculum that's going to help people achieve technological competency. Next.
Sorry, just one quick comment on that methodology, Professor Reimers, so you know. We originally intended to have an English-speaking group and a Spanish-speaking group. We ended up with a Chinese-speaking group because Google doesn't work in China. So part of our whole goal here is cross-cultural communication, ultimately leveraging professional networks across the globe. One of the consistent challenges we face with technology, particularly reconciling technology in China with China and the United States. Sorry, Jack, next slide.
That's okay, Joe, thank you. Next. So in discussing the results, we really think that some of them were optimistic, maybe overly optimistic in self-rating the school and the students' readiness. China reported the highest scores, again, Mexico the lowest, and that raises the question of equity in technology, right? Because yes, as technology advances, costs will fall, but we have a digital divide, which in the immediate future is only going to get wider and wider. Next. So we asked the question, where will I be working in 10 years? And as educators, we had a problem deciding that and how our jobs and how our field is going to change. What we didn't have a problem realizing is that we don't know all those future jobs because they haven't even existed yet. Right? But what we do know, what we can control, are the skills a transitional generation is going to need to be successful in a world of exponential technological change. And so we focus on questions like resilience and lifelong learning and growth mindset and the appreciation of diversity and the ability to work in diverse groups and straight on action learning. So next, what we did was we applied the work of Dr. Reimers and of course the UNESCO report to our own research and discussions, dividing each of the categories in Dr. Reimers' principles and discussing where we went with that. So next, end in mind. Starting with the end in mind, we noticed that, and I want to share this quote, we made it bold, from Dan Breakwood, who's a One World board member, who works for Gartner, which is a $4 billion technological consulting firm. And Dan shared with us in our discussion, he said, the pace of change in the world will never be slower than it is today. So here we are worried about exponential change, but what Dan is saying is it's never going to be this simple again. It's going to keep getting more complicated and more complicated, right? UNESCO constantly reminds us that digital literacy is a basic human right. And then look at some of the words they use here. We need an urgent structural revision. They point to the disconnect and the immediacy of the need for education to transition from linear to exponential. And again, there is an immediate and critical need for professional development among teachers, and to which we say absolutely ditto. Let's go, next slide. Other than keeping the end in mind, right? Leveraging improvement networks. Well, that's exactly what, I mean, our work together in the past year is about leveraging improvement networks. And I think, I know I've learned a lot from doing this and in terms of pedagogy and approach. And I've been out of teaching for quite a few years now. But the ability to talk to educators around the world and share our concerns and to share our solutions has, for me, been personally very rewarding and enlightening. And I want to thank everybody else for doing that as well. Our next slide, it talks about improvement networks and learning by doing, right? So again, learning by doing, we have to contextualize education so that our students understand that biology and chemistry and earth science and astronomy, that they're related. And they're, you know, that the fundamental questions of sciences are who are we and where do we come from and where are we going? And critical thinking needed to figure that out without superstition and unexplained, unprovable facts, right? So critical thinking becomes a really important part of our teaching with young people. Next, we talked about artificial intelligence and the problem of problem-based education. So we know about AI in the classroom. We know that it's going to transform the classroom and kind of take away the sage on the stage approach to teaching. But VR, right, virtual reality, is now entering the classrooms, and it has incredible possibilities, right? Surely it can be more than just a tour of ancient Rome, but there's much to be gained by that, or a tour of Venice, or a tour of the great masters, right? But it can also be used either as a competitive tool or a cooperative tool to put students in a real world scenario where they have to solve problems. And so virtual reality, I think, will revolutionize education across cultures. Next, the power of collaboration on diverse teams. I know Joe wants to talk about that, right? But it absolutely taught me lessons.
Let's talk about it for 2 seconds now with you and Mary.
Sure.
It was really fascinating for me. And Mary, maybe you can kick things off. But the idea was, you know, we're trying to communicate across cultural languages. We have two fantastic committed educators, as you can see. And I want each of you to sort of tell us about some of the challenges and opportunities created by technology. Mary, do you want to share? Mary, please, maybe just stop the screen for 2 seconds, Lindsay. Mary, ¿quieres compartir la dificultad?
Sí, claro, por supuesto. Muchas gracias.
Okay.
Pues la verdad, partimos de una idea que quiero de verdad la oportunidad de poder compartir un par de ideas que están asociadas a cómo la educación podemos ver la trascendencia de lo que hagamos hoy a partir de los principios de la teoría de Kurzweil y la singularidad tecnológica. Si en esa visión de la línea de evolución de la raza humana al respecto del desarrollo del conocimiento, creamos una tercera línea asociada con la educación, con nuestra capacidad para aprender y comprender el mundo en el que vivimos.
Okay, déjame introducir por un segundo. So just basically, and if I get it wrong, please, but basically what Mary's talking about is technology is a transcendent technology that impacts the whole of humanity. So the question is, how do you present it? How do you educate for it? Entonces, Mari, la pregunta específica que quiere que responda es, dado esa visión, ¿cuánta dificultad fue comunicar con Jack cuáles fueron las dificultades y cómo la tecnología te ayudó para esa cosa.
Ok.
What's that on the screen there, Lindsay?
Ok, digamos que estamos llegando a un punto de inflexión en el que la capacidad del desarrollo de la asimilación de la evolución tecnológica y el conocimiento se detiene o se pudiera detener, en tanto que ambas líneas avanzan por sí mismas, es decir, la evolución de la raza humana y el pensamiento, el conocimiento. Esto nos lleva a un principio de singularidad que nos plantea este teórico y que nos lleva también a reconocer un principio de singularidad tecnológica. Ahora, ¿esto cómo se refleja en el campo de la educación?
Disculpa, Mari. So this is thank you for sharing with us this technological evolution, right? We talk about singularity and how we teach around the singularity. I should also mention Mary works at the Pedagogical University in Mexico, and she's going to be taking this information, Professor Reimers, all this effort over the last 6 months and trying to study it, reevaluate the results, and take it forward. So, muchas gracias, Mari. Estoy diciendo que UPN va a ayudarnos. Vamos a volver a la presentación, entonces. So, Jack, let's go back to the presentation.
Okay.
You can, vamos a volver a la presentación. So, Jack, you could just tell us what challenges you faced. Muchas gracias, Mari.
Sure. So Jack's ability with the Spanish language pretty much ends at hello and how are you and goodbye, and it was nice to meet you. And so at the beginning, when Mary and I started working together, I would say, Joe, you gotta be in on the meeting. You gotta be in on the call. I need a translator. And so it was slow and laborious because, and I think Mary's English is probably better than my Spanish, but we still, we had 2 different languages and 2 different cultures, and we were trying to communicate with one another. And again, part of it is they gave technology an exponential change to the least technological person in one world. And so when I started a year ago, I was like, what's a Google Doc? You know, and I've since learned that. And then somewhere shortly after we began, I found a little button called Google Translate. And wow, my whole world just opened up, right? And I was able to take Mary's emails and translate them. And even then, you know, the culture of our language differences amazed me, right? So, you know, the kid from the Bronx is very informal and direct, you know, whereas Mary had this beautiful, flowering, you know, intellectual language, use of English and Spanish that I'm sure the translation didn't even do justice to.
Yep. So I think that, Jack, thanks very much for sharing that. I think we'll just go for these next few slides. I want to hear from Professor Reimers, and clearly collaboration, diverse teams is very powerful. You got about another 2 minutes to finish this up, and then we're going to take it to Professor Reimers. I think
absolutely, and that's 2 minutes is all we'll need. So, you know,
so we talked about this. If we could.
Yeah, I think of Anthony Appia and his idea of fallible conversations when we talk about collaborating in diverse teams. Next, Mary and her team added a piece on flipped classrooms or reverse pedagogy. And again, it's really, rather than teacher-centered, it's student-centered. And they also talk about, again, much like the UNESCO report, the concern of cognitive development in the first years of life and the fear of AI being able to challenge the human cognitive network and the singularity, if you would. Next.
Well, and I'll make an advertisement for One World there. We're going to have an article published on our preschool efforts to take global citizenship, preschool efforts in Mexico. Sorry, Jack.
Great. No, that's crime. So we see digital literacy as a combination of each of these things, whether it's cultural understanding or critical thinking or functional skills or decision making. You know, each of these segments can be taught and they can be scaled, and you know, we can do platforms here. And so, you know, the need for character ed and leadership skills and SEL and global competence are going to allow us, I think, to build this network even more global than it already is. And so finally, last slide, I believe, one more. There's never been a more exciting time to be young. Our students are going to be challenged, and our ultimate answer comes from our Chinese friends, to teach with a loving heart.
And do we have a question slide, Lindsay? Right. So again, so Professor Reimers, again, same questions, maybe stop sharing, Lindsay, is, you know, one, how important is it we teach technology awareness? One of the things that always surprised me, how few teachers understand Moore's law, singularity, the pace of change. You know, as Dan Brakewood, our board member, said at the beginning of our COLP, the world's never going to be as slow as it is. You talked eloquently just now about how complex our world is, and it's getting increasingly complex every day, in part by technology. So maybe, I was wondering if you could talk about, and again, for me, you resolve my conundrum. Yes, we know we need to teach about global competence. Yes, we know that teaching global competence is central to teaching for the fourth industrial revolution or technological change. But it seems to me that the biggest gap is here. The biggest gap, people do not fully appreciate the impact of exponential change. When I present, I talk about a linear world to world of exponential change, 30 steps in a linear world from the room to the back of the room, 30 steps in an exponential world where you double 30 times, you get to a billion steps, you can circumnavigate the globe 25 times. I don't think most teachers understand that Moore's law is the equivalent of circumnavigating the globe 25 times, and that we have to prepare children for 20,000 years of change in our lifetime. So I threw an awful lot at you, but educating for the fourth industrial revolution, for me, that's what's really summarized in the presentation. Jack, can we give Jack and Mary a round of applause? Thank you very much. Thank you. Sorry, Professor Reimers.
So UNESCO's Futures of Education report talks about technology in three interrelated but different ways. Number one, it does talk about technology, information and telecommunications technologies, as a tool to augment the opportunities for learning and for personalization. And I'd say if you read the report, which was written during the pandemic, in which many school systems were basically trying to provide educational opportunity teaching remotely, that potential of technology, as well as the awareness of the enormous gaps in opportunity to learn through technology between nations and among students within nations, is very much reflected in the report. And speaking personally, I would say that one of the lessons the pandemic taught us is that the education system of the future is a blended system in which students learn face-to-face many things, but they also have opportunities to augment the curriculum, to pursue their own interests through technology. So that's one of the ways in which the report talks about technology. The second way in which the report talks about technology is about an extremely powerful tool to augment human well-being and to help us address our challenges. So for example, climate change, which the first presentation talked about mitigation and adaptation. There's a third response to climate change, which is reverting climate change. And some of the most exciting work on reverting climate change is based on the use of technology, not telecommunications or information technology, but nanoparticles, which are placed on the clouds to deflect some particular forms of radiation, or new technologies to dispose of human waste, or safer nuclear technologies to give us energy. So the report recognizes that the world in which we function is one where the lack of awareness and access to technologies is depriving individuals from tools that can help them augment their well-being. The third way in which the report talks about technology is with respect to the risks that technology creates to human coexistence. And it highlights the necessity of educating students on the awareness of those risks and with the discernment and the ethical capacity to figure out the trade-offs on those risks. So for example, the report talks about how artificial intelligence can now basically place individuals in very segregated virtual worlds where they only hear from people who think like themselves. And this is a challenge for democracy. It's a challenge for people to develop the capacity to listen and to negotiate differences with others who are unlike them. So think the challenges which have been well documented in the press of how social media networks like Facebook have created to our democracy by spreading misinformation, by creating algorithms that radicalize individuals because they increasingly bring them into people that have their views or even more extreme versions of their views and prevent them from connecting with people who think differently. Now, those are obviously all of those things connect to technology, but they're not the same thing. I confess that in Jack and Mary's presentation of how you're tackling that, I was a little bit confused because I wasn't sure at any given time which of those three different treatments of technology in the report your efforts are tackling. And my suggestion would be that as a matter of method, you become very clear on which of these things you are tackling with which interventions, that you don't commingle them in a mush of technology rubric where it's unclear what it is that you're trying to advance. And so, for example, I think a part of Jack's presentation was about how do you use technology within the network to help you better function as a network, as we are doing today, for example. How do you enhance the technological proficiency of your network members and of your teachers so you can collaborate across schools, so your students can collaborate? How do you build the capacities of all students in your networks to augment their learning through technology? That, I think, is a very clear goal. It seems to me you're doing that already. You are a virtual network. The pandemic helped you do that. And I could see how you could take that piece and treat it in the same way in which Kat and Ariel and their colleagues are treating their work on global citizenship. In other words, you could say, okay, what is the set of technological competencies to teach and to learn that we want our members to develop? And where are we? What is their self-perceived capacity to access those competencies? And what interventions are we going to create so that we level the playing field within our network? And should we develop our own framework of what does it mean to be a technologically enabled school? That's goal number one. With respect to the second, kind of equipping your students with an understanding of the power of technology, kind of Kurzweil argument. I think Mary referred a little bit to it. This techno-optimistic view that, technology is going to save us, I guess, from ourselves. And of course, technology has the power to help us do amazing things. And that, I think, is a separate initiative from helping you use technology for teaching and learning. It's about including in the curriculum as an object of study technology. So of course, the first presentation today on hydroponics is an example of that. Hydroponics is in fact one technology of farming that is not dependent on access to land. And so you could envision a range of projects within your networks, design project-based experiences designed to build the capacities of your students to understand this world that is empowered by technology. The third set of things, which I didn't hear either Jack or Mary talk about, which is a big theme on the report, and that is developing awareness deep understanding of the challenges that technology creates for people, for democratic coexistence and so on. That to me is an object of study, perhaps something that Kat and Ariel and their group could include within their understanding of global competency, because certainly people need to be educated, just like they need to be educated on climate change and what causes it and what can we do about it. They need to be educated, and they need to become more savvy than these techno-optimists of Silicon Valley who thought they were going to save humanity and ended up endangering democracy in their naive and ignorant, shallow, superficial understanding of what technology can do. And I haven't heard you, either Mary or Jack, address that issue. And maybe it's not an issue for the moment. Maybe you need to sequence these. But I guess my overall suggestion to what I've heard, and forgive me if there are things I misheard, is that you try to be clear on which of these three different ways to think about technology and education you're tackling with any given intervention. Maybe separate them, maybe put different groups, maybe put different interest groups within your community to deal with them, because they're not all the same. They relate in that they have the word technology, but used in very different ways, right?
Beautiful. Thank you very much, Professor Reimers. Let's give everybody a round of applause there. And now we're going to go to our last two. I'm going to be leading the conversation, but on this next slides, universal values is myself and Suri. If you could wave to everybody. But ultimately, the UNESCO report talked about values as respect, empathy, equality, and solidarity must be core to the mission of the new social contract. Next. And look, I'm conscious of time. I'm going to go through these rapid speed because I really want to get through to a conversation. And I'm thrilled that we're getting all these pearls from Professor Reimers. You can see what, again, this is what UNESCO talked about. Next. All right, we're gonna hear from the president of Character.org right now. Lindsay, let's hopefully that'll work.
Hi, to all my friends at One World United and Virtuous. My name is Arthur Schwartz, and I proudly serve as president of Character.org. I also am serving as co-chair, one of the co-chairs for our Universal Values COLP. Joe Carbon asked me to say a few words about the importance of values. First off, I know that not everybody uses the word values. Some use the phrase character strengths or virtues or principles or qualities. Whatever word you use, please know that this idea is different than skills. Reading is a skill. Understanding our emotions is a skill. But honesty is not a skill. Honesty is a character strength. The truth is that we need both life skills, 21st century skills, and these universal values. Joe also asked me to talk about the 4 different areas of character. For instance, the character strengths of moral character, honesty and integrity, caring and compassion, gratitude, as well as the courage to take initiative. And then there are the strengths of performance character, responsibility, self-discipline, goal setting, grit. There are also the strengths of intellectual character, curiosity, humility, open-mindedness, critical thinking. And finally, there are the strengths of civic character, respect, fairness, volunteering, contributing to the common good. Our goal across the world is to inspire and equip every student to understand, to care about, and to consistently practice the core values that will make up their moral character, performance character, intellectual character, and civic character. Thank you for all you're doing for One World.
Beautiful. Lindsay, next slide. Thank you, Arthur. Arthur had a conflict today, so he couldn't be with us. But he was one of the two co-creators. Sorry, please wave to the crowd and we'll have you. And then just the next slide, if we could, Lindsay. I'm going to try and get through these quickly. No, somehow there you go. So what is a universal value? We took this definition and basically it's a value that has worth for all or almost all people. Next. So the other thing we're going to talk about, we're going to do a quick exercise at the end that will hopefully you'll lead us with Professor Reimers. So we talked about in this COLP portrait of a 21st century graduate. So I'm going to ask you, what do you want to see for your graduates? Let's just say a high school graduate, right? And then these are, okay. And then, so these are some of the challenges of the 21st century. Okay. Okay. So next slide. So we got together, we finally learned how to use the Jamboard. So we have the Jamboard in terms of these are some of the values people talked about as important skills and dispositions needed to prosper in the 21st century. Next. These are some of the values people held important. Next. And then can we agree there's a list of set of universal values? That's an ongoing conversation we need to have. Next. These are some of the universal values that people came up with. Harmony was a big one in China. Next. Then these are some, there's just something to go through very quickly, Lindsay. You know, how are you teaching values in your school, in your country? Wales talks about religion, but doesn't advocate. I think the fact that the United States is not even allowed to talk about religion has led to a number of different programs. China places a premium on harmony. And I always say my friends in Mexico and the Spanish-speaking world have a big advantage because they have the word enseñar y educar. Y todo padre de familia quiere un estudiante bien educado, much more than bien enseñado. Okay, next slide. By the way, Mary, did we change, sorry, Lindsay, did we change translators to Anna? Yep. Did that happen? Great.
So, yep.
Okay, if that's not happening, let us know. Ultimately, what practice is for me, I'm a non-educator. What are we trying to do to make good, help create good kids? There's a whole bunch of programs in the United States, but the overall comment that came from us to us from China, from our good friend Mark Wendt, inner peace. Next. What kind of obstacles are you finding in teaching values in school? Next. How does culture impact values? Next. West, as Professor Reimers talked about, are profoundly divided. I think we need a holistic conversation. I'm Republican. All too often people discard me, discount me, and try and cancel me because I'm Republican. I would argue we share the same goals, but I find all too often I'm canceled simply because I'm Republican. Is the divide that we have in the United States a divide of values or something else? And clearly social media contributes to that divide. Next. Survey results came in pretty good. In fact, very much better than I expected. Our school believes there's a set of universal values upon which all people can agree and support, and we promote those values. I think we were a bit optimistic there. Next. Again, a bit more optimistic. Next. And we'll make this presentation available on our website to everybody. So here's the portrait of a 21st century graduate. I think we're going to open this up to a conversation. Next slide. Yes, Professor Reimers. I don't want to put you, well, I guess I do want to put you on the spot. I apologize. And you can stop sharing now, but the bottom line, oh, that's right. And actually, if you want to put, if you're the participants want to put in the chat while Professor Reimers is talking, your view of what a 21st century graduate should have, what are the values, what are the skills, dispositions, what are we trying to do, right? We're going to have this new social contract we take across the globe. What does the 21st century Renaissance man or woman look like, Professor Reimers? And please, if you want to share in the chat, be my guest. Professor Reimers.
Look, I think the question of values, or what I call ethical dispositions, obviously is an important one. And in both of my books, in which with my graduate students, we develop curriculum aligned with the SDGs, the World Course and the 60 lessons, we list 180 traits, a number of which are what you would call character traits. Now, personally, I don't think about character as something that can be parceled out from other competencies. I think they reinforce one another. So, for example, my view of the kind of competencies that prepare students to be global citizens include a deep understanding, appreciation, respect for human rights, and the ability to advance universal human rights. And so I would find it very difficult to talk about graduates as if you could have, to talk about character as if you could abstract it, separate it from human rights. In my view, we are producing human beings that need to be integrated human beings. So if they are to care about climate change, there are certain things they need to know, obviously, about climate change. They need to have developed certain dispositions, the belief that they are capable, that they are skilled, but they also need to have some ethical, moral qualities, that one doesn't sit idle in the face of a problem, that you step up and you try to do something about it, do what is within your power to address that. And all those things are interrelated. The reason I think it's necessary to emphasize that is because I am sure that Mr. Putin, who is placed the world at greater risk of a nuclear holocaust since World War II, thinks of himself as a very ethical man and has great designs to develop the character of the Russian people, as do nations that have zero regard for human rights. They do believe in moral education. So I guess what I'm saying is that what I do think a dimension of ethical competencies is integral to preparing people for the 21st century. I personally don't find it possible to disassociate those competencies from the other competencies, from the whole set of competencies that produce people who can actually help us advance that. And yet, I could imagine, I mean, there is an organization that someone put me in touch with, very conservative organization that claims they do character, I won't name them, and whose founder is a big activist against gay marriage, for example, in the United States. Now, I can understand how he would see his views as internally coherent, but they certainly are incoherent with a proposition that believes all humans have the same rights just because they are, and the same dignity just because they are. And it is in fact the case that in the United States, the field of character education, a piece of it, has been captured by not just politically conservative individuals, by individuals who espouse an intolerant ideology, who are not committed to the notion of fundamental equality of all humans. And so I guess that's what I can offer by with respect to what are my views on the characters and values that a global education should develop. They're in my books. And I would say, you know, they are the ones that are aligned with advancing a world in which we recognize that human beings are not a means to an end, economic or political. Human beings are an end in themselves. They have a dignity just because they are. And all divisions that we have fabricated to define the identity of people are just that, fabrication. But at the core, they have the same dignity. They have all the same dignity because they're humans. They're members of the same species. And I think the most important values that we should teach is help people understand that basic humanity and to respect the humanity of everybody, right? And do what is within their power to not diminish that humanity in any way. I'm not sure.
Yeah, that answers the question beautifully. We're a little tight for time. I will remind everybody that you emphasize the UN Declaration of Human Rights, the teaching of the UN Declaration of Human Rights. Those may be our universal values. So I think certainly, I think that's one thing we'll continue to work with. Secondly, I'll make a plug for One World. Again, you know, the one great thing about One World from my standpoint, our three foundational values have never changed. And that first one is exactly what you said, Professor Reimers. We need to treat each and every human being on this planet with supreme dignity, that each and every human being shares an essential human connection that binds us together. And so that's the foundational principle in one world. We all, second foundational principle, we need new forms of global cooperation. We need to generate those conversations to bring people together, recognizing their dignity, generate those fallible conversations that Kwame Appiah talks about in his book, Cosmopolitanism. And third, and most importantly, we need to generate respectful conversations, fallible conversations to understand our increasingly complex world. Now, we're going to continue to zoom up, power on. We have one last COLP. We have a lot of people to talk here. And so we're going to, poor Annie, it's in China. It's 10:08 in China. That's 10:08 p.m. Let's go to the next slide. And we're going to hear, I think, Annie, can you share your screen or would you like me to share your slides? I can share your slides if you want, Annie.
I have the slides too.
Oh, you have the slides. Oh, even better. Lindsay, you can share slides. Why don't you share? So here's the intro to Cultures of Peace from UNESCO. You can all read that. And again, we'll make these presentations available. If you could start to share Annie's slides, Lindsay, that would be terrific. Annie, are you with us?
Yes, can you hear
Beautiful.
me?
There you go. So learning from life. Over to you, Annie. Unfortunately, we only have about 5
Hi.
minutes. 5 minutes.
Okay, thank you, Joe. Dear global friends, good morning. I'm from Jinling Primary School, and it is a great pleasure to meet you all. And our principal, Madam Ling, is also listening here. Yeah, so as we all know, there are olive branches on the emblem of the United Nations. Next slide, Lindsay, thank you. It expresses people's desire for peace and unity. However, over the past thousands of years, there have been more than 15,000 recorded wars, resulting in 3.5 billion direct or indirect deaths. Next slide, thank you. Actually, each person who died in the war all once had a happy family. It is the war which deprived all people's happiness. War brings damage to humans as well as to civilizations. Wars also bring environmental problems and ecological disasters. There is, to say, no real winner in a war. Once an old man who survived in World War II asked a question, "Do you know what heaven looks like?" And he then said, "A day without war is heaven. Peace is heaven." These words tell us that only by reflecting on war can we live in peace forever. So peace in Chinese, it has two Chinese characters. One is he, another is ping. He means harmony. It is the concept we are holding in China. Harmony is a very important part in Chinese traditional culture. There are many proverbs such as treat others the way you want it to be treated. A harmonious family nourishes well-being. And these harmony culture are deeply rooted in the Chinese people's spiritual life and guide our daily lives. And in today's society, the meaning of harmony culture is more abundant. In today's, it contains the harmony between human and nature, the harmony among all countries, and the harmony among communities, and also harmony in human hearts and kindness. So based on the Culture of Harmony and UNESCO report, we have carried out a lot of peace activities in school, aiming to sow the seeds of peace in the hearts of students. We make full use of campus broadcasts, blackboard newspapers, class display boards to publicize the theme of peace. Students posted materials on the walls and windows. And our school also regularly conducts micro lectures on the theme of peace education. Each class held a class meeting themed My Dream of Peace. Students choose research topics related to the value of peace through data collection and class exchange and sharing. At the same time, teachers of various subjects also pay attention to implement peace education when they teach. And also we have different activities for different grades. For first graders, they hand make peace stove wish cards, which they could write down the vision they held towards the world peace. For the second graders, they express their impressions on peace or what peace is in their eyes through drawing or painting with their creativity. And the third graders, students read poems or create their own poems based on the topic of peace. And third graders, they sing songs on the topic of peace. And fifth graders, they discuss the current Russia and Ukraine situation together and give speeches on the topic of peace. Their speeches were recorded, made into videos, and shared with students school-wide. And as for the students in the sixth grade, they were encouraged to independently select and make research on one of the walls and give a presentation to their class. We also cooperate with parents, community, and institutions to conduct the peace education. So we believe that the ultimate goal of peace education is to enrich children's spiritual lives and help them to develop the correct views on values, life, and happiness. So let us work together for a shared future with a shared vision of peace. Thank you.
Wow, wow. I never thought you'd get that done in 5 minutes. Not only you got it done in 5 minutes, it's absolutely spectacular. Great job. All right, let's get back to our, let's give Annie, and by the way, Annie's first language is Chinese. For me, it's fascinating to see what you're doing, Annie. Thank you so much. All right, I'm going to present this presentation for our Spanish colleagues. Since we're translating one way, we've got a fantastic presentation on the culture of peace from Mexico. Next. And basically what they found is our world is going through a critical moment. Education is not fulfilling the process in terms of helping us build a peaceful, just, and sustainable future. Too much inequality. Next. And again, these presentations will be made available. What they said is that we need to guarantee that our world is a world of abundance, not scarcity, and that everyone fully enjoys the same human rights, what Dr. Reimers was just talking about. So despite a context of great uncertainty, we believe that we should have hope and for humanity the chance to participate in co-creating better futures has never been greater as we head into 2050. Next, this is from Guerrero, Mexico. Some of the challenges in the state of Guerrero, Mexico, Guerrero means warrior, the rates of violence are on the rise. In social networks, what's happening at the moment is shared more quickly, and there's an increase in the levels of psychological distress and societal ideation. Intolerance becomes visible more easily. Next. That's the challenge. And factors that contribute to a culture of peace, they spend a lot of time in their basic education with using the curriculum to educate for cultures of peace. They found that One World has been a real positive for them in teaching peace, and they've been educating using the autogenic method as well. Next. So this is the school, Sor Juana Inés de la Cruz, educated for a culture of peace. Next. And ultimately, we asked them to answer a few questions. First of all, what cultural factors contribute to level peace in your community? This is a community that has several indigenous populations, and they find that the multicultural richness encourages a diversity of artistic and recreational practices that can be turned into a positive. They also, in terms of socioeconomic factors, great job opportunities have improved in various areas. In terms of promoting good treatment, respect, and they've also worked hard to promote respect for cultural, ethnic, and sexual diversity. They've tried to help people understand that we're all an important part of a human family. And finally, they're trying to connect with the essential human part, dignity of each citizen. Next. They've translated the Sustainable Development Goals into several indigenous languages, which we'll hear about in a second. Next. And they have a project that they're going to talk about, but ultimately they say true education consists in obtaining the best of oneself. Justi, ¿estás con nosotros? Rita, ¿están con nosotros? You can stop sharing if you will. Justi o Rita, ¿pueden compartir la experiencia y la actividad que hicieron para promover la paz? Justi está con nosotros.
Hola, buenos días.
Sí, aquí está Justi.
Jenny, ok, ¿cuál fue la actividad que hicieron para promover la paz? En la última foto.
Ok,
Yeah.
¿puedo compartir?
No, es que no, estamos con el
Ok.
último foto.
Ok,
Quería
ok,
hablar
ok.
específicamente la actividad que hicieron.
Ok, bueno, buenos días a todos, decirles que a partir de hace un tiempo estamos compenetrando, estamos combinando las actividades, los proyectos y estamos trabajando de manera interdisciplinar. Entonces ya no solo trabajamos la paz por separado, sino trabajamos también el medio ambiente y todo esto nos lleva obviamente a una cultura de la paz. Pensamos que la falta de paz trae destrucción en cualquiera de sus formas. Y el día de mañana precisamente vamos a completar un proyecto del medio ambiente que nos lleva a generar la paz porque los chicos se conocen y hicimos bombas de semilla, ese es el nombre del proyecto, es un proyecto japonés que trajimos aquí a Tlapa Guerrero, en donde los chicos hicieron un material quería mostrarles las imágenes de cómo hicieron esas bombas y el día de mañana que en uno de los lugares de aquí de Guerrero, de Tlapa específicamente, inicia esta situación de lanzarlas y con la lluvia, entonces se espera que florezcan en próximos meses.
Muchas gracias, Jenny. Muchas gracias. Let's give everybody a round of applause. If we go back to the presentation now. So basically what Jenny said is they do everything on an interdisciplinary level. So they incorporate cultures of peace in everything they do, from mathematics to climate change. All right, next slide, or is that the last slide? Okay, we talked about universal values. This is what we did in the US. We'll share this presentation. Let's just go through this because we're really short for time. This is what we did in the US with our Jam board. Keep going. Yep. Tony Devine, who is a vice president of the Global Peace Foundation, put together this slides show for us. I think I want to recommend you look at it. Keep going. And obviously there's no education without peace. Next. Development depends on peace. Next. Educators need to contribute to peace. Next. And ultimately the role of students. So Tony, and in the next slide, Tony has a video we won't have time for now, but he's going to share that. We'll share that with our presentation. Okay. So stop there for 1 second. I'm going to stop sharing. I also wanted to ask Suri. Is Suri with us? Suri, puedes tomar 2 minutos o 1 minuto para compartir los 7 hábitos. Because the last thing, I apologize, I left Suri out, went through the universal values so quickly. Suri's our partner for universal values. And in her school, they use Stephen Covey's 7 Habits. And so she's going to briefly tell us how she uses those 7 habits in her school. Suri, 1 minuto medio para tomar los 7 hábitos y cómo impacta. Puedes hablar.
Muchísimas gracias, Joe. Muchísimas gracias a todos. Y pues bueno, hablar de valores es hablar de unos cambios, de ser personas de transición. Y nosotros, en el Centro Educativo Años Maravillosos, estamos en un proceso de renovación al trabajar los 7 hábitos con nuestros alumnos, desde preescolar hasta nivel bachillerato. Los valores universales, como lo comenta la UNESCO.
Voy a traducir rápidamente. So basically they work with the 7 habits from preschool right through the high school, and they consider each human being a person in transition. And they try and inculcate these 7 habits. Sigue, Suri.
Gracias. Dentro de los valores universales que propone la UNESCO es el respeto, la empatía, la igualdad y la solidaridad, que va dentro de los 7 hábitos que estamos trabajando con nuestros alumnos. El hábito 1 nos habla sobre la responsabilidad y que es la libertad de elegir.
So
el hábito 2.
First value is responsibility, which incorporates the 4 UNESCO values. El segundo
Es comenzar con un fin en la mente, qué es lo que queremos lograr en el día y cuál será mi meta.
Start with the end in mind is number 2. Tercero.
Poner primero lo primero, que es priorizar, identificar qué es lo importante y qué es lo menos importante.
Be sure to prioritize is number 3. Make what's important important. Cuarto.
El cuarto nos habla de pensar, ganar, y es un valor que viene en la UNESCO, que es la igualdad. Ganas tú, gano yo y ganamos todos.
Fourth is win-win, which is completely consistent with equality for the UNESCO report. 5.
El hábito 5 nos habla sobre la empatía, escuchar con los ojos, oídos y corazón para entender a las personas.
So empathy is number 5. Listen with your eyes and ears first.
El hábito 6 nos habla sobre la solidaridad, que es el sinergizar, trabajar en equipo.
So solidarity is number 6, completely consistent with UNESCO and synergize. And 7?
Y el hábito 7 nos habla sobre afilar la sierra, sobre sus 4 dimensiones, corazón, cuerpo, mente y espíritu, y abarca todo un valor importantísimo que todos debemos trabajar, que es el valor del amor.
So the 7th one is to bring your spiritual, physical, and intellectual life together in one being that's consistent. Y voy a adelantar que esos 7 valores han tenido un impacto muy positivo en tu escuela, ¿correcto?
Así es.
Okay.
Todos nuestros niños han aprendido lo que es el liderazgo, tienen sus roles de liderazgo dentro de la escuela y también en casas tienen sus roles de liderazgo. Y les ha ayudado bastante, inclusive a los padres de familia. Tenemos equipos de padres de familia, equipos de maestros, y en este año se está formando un equipo de alumnos que lleven sobre los 7 hábitos en general.
Okay, let's thank Suri for her work, her fantastic work. And basically what Suri, muchas gracias, Suri. So basically what Suri says, they teach leadership both inside and outside of school. The leadership's not only had a positive impact on the students, but on the families and parents as well. Okay, so Professor Reimers, we're at 10:24. We're supposed to go to 10:30. I know you're moving house. I appreciate your taking time with us today. I'm going to offer to our participants to stay on till 11 o'clock. Anybody wants to, anybody needs to go, please go. Professor Reimers, I presume you're going to have to leave. Otherwise, you may have troubles with your wife. But maybe if you can comment on the cultures of peace and then give us your overview and conclusions if indeed you have to leave.
I think it's terrific that you have a group that is working on this question of how to equip students to actually in their life become of standards of stewards of a culture of peace. And I do think that this is a topic very much like the topic of global citizenship that would benefit from the kind of work that that team has done, the global citizenship team has done in naming what is it that you want students to learn. Because actually, the topic of peace education is one where UNESCO has worked for a long time, and you can find a lot of very useful resources there. So there is no need to reinvent the wheel, but there would be benefit for a network such as One World to take stock of what exists, just as you have done for global citizenship education, and then say, well, what's our model? And what are our ideas of the competencies that are implicated in creating people for a culture of peace, and what are the experiences that would help them do that? You know, my own view is that the absence to peace is violence, is the use of violence as a way to solve conflicts. But I think conflict is somewhat inevitable. Whenever you have individuals, if you're going to respect them, people may want different things. So the question is, how do we help individuals, communities, and nations to resolve their differences through nonviolent means? That's the challenge. And I don't think it's enough to basically get students to say, well, I love peace, I'd like to live in a peaceful world, and kind of repeat peace as a mantra, as a slogan, if we don't give them the skills to recognize that you need to behave in certain ways. And the absence of, I mean, peace cannot be, well, I'm going to suppress those who think differently than I do, or I'm going to put them in, detention camps of some sorts because I think their beliefs are wrong, and I'm going to brainwash them so they believe just like I do, so we can have peace and harmony. And so, I have to remember that the Universal Declaration of Human Rights was a product of a time of extreme violence, World War II, the use of violence for nations to resolve their differences, and the use of violence within nations. And the declaration was an effort to say, what would it take to build a world in which we respect the dignity of every person, and we respect certain conditions regardless of how much power those individuals have in any given place. And so, again, my view of one of the things that are essential to help people develop the skills to advance a culture of peace is teach them how do we behave in ways that recognize the human rights of everybody. I would find it very difficult to imagine a peace education program that would get kids to repeat, "I love peace," that negated the basic human rights of everybody. I think those two go together. And my guess is that most UN organizations would see them as going together. But I think that the bottom line is, one, I salute that you have made the building of a culture of peace an explicit focus of your efforts, because it is sadly more necessary now than ever, and that you are experimenting within your network with different ways to do that. Again, in these 5 different domains that you're working on, I see great opportunities for you to borrow from one domain to another. And I do think that from the domain of global competency, which has spent all this time reading what's available, developing your own model, figuring out a way to assess it, this group could borrow something similar. In fact, maybe you would conclude after you do it that those two are not separate domains, that they're one and the same thing. But maybe they are separate domains, that's fine. And then from the group that is working on climate change, you could borrow this notion of pedagogical experimentation. What are the pedagogies that can help our students actually build the capacities that would help them understand why and how peace breaks down, and have the skills to be proactive upholders of a culture of peace? So a lot of work to do here. But I suppose that for any of these 5 domains that you're working on, what is clear to me is that the One World Network is committed to developing transformative learning and teaching experiences that produce deep learning, not surface. It's really very easy to teach slogans. It's really very easy to show a shallow commitment to a difficult subject, right? And so you get your students to say, yes, I know what the SDGs are and I can name them and I love them. And yes, I believe peace is a good thing and I love it. That doesn't really do much. And it's clear to me that you all understand that, and that this difficult process that you're engaging in is precisely about finding what are the kinds of changes, pedagogical, organizational, in how you work, that you need to produce to actually produce changes in behaviors, in values, in students, which is in the end what matters, right?
Professor Reimers, if I could indulge just a couple more minutes. Lindsay, I'm going to share my 3 slides if I could. And as to sort of guide us as we move forward on our new social contract. Let's see if I manage. Okay, so can you see my screen?
Yeah, we can.
All right, beautiful. So let me see slideshow. Only 3 slides. So and I'll give all 3 slides and then get your reaction. So obviously, as we try and develop this new social contract for education, clearly human connectedness is essential. I think we're all agreed. And I love this quote from Jeff Sachs. It says, we share a common fate on a crowded planet, a common fate that will require new forms of global cooperation, a fundamental point of blinding simplicity that many leaders have yet to understand or embrace. Unfortunately, too many people from my preferred party suffer from this blinding simplicity, but we'll stay away from politics. And ultimately, our 21st century world is going to flourish or perish. And this is from Jeff Sachs. Now, ultimately, this is one of the challenges we face. I'd love to hear from you on this topic, Professor Reimers. You know, shouldn't human survival be a fundamental goal for our new social contract for education? You know, we have all these different quotes. Ultimately, Sir Martin Rees tells us the chance of reaching the year 2100 are 50-50. MIT professor tells us technology is giving life the potential to flourish like never or to self-destruct. Aren't we going one of 2 ways? And ultimately, Dr. James Martin, founder of the Oxford Martin School of 21st Century, says we're at a crossroad. It could be our best century or our worst. How do we make it our best century? Well, again, Dr. Martin tells us we need to teach for a flourishing, and we need to do 3 things. Understand the options for the 21st century. That's been the #1 goal for this COLP. think logically about our future, and collectively take rational action. We're trying to create the development generation that builds that world of peaceful abundance. So Professor Reimers, two questions. One, how do we talk about the existential threat that no one wants to talk about? And two, how do we take forward this idea? How do you suggest we move forward with this new social contract and the broad global social dialogue?
So first, let me say, Joe, I agree with the ideas in the 3 slides that you have shared. Yes, I think the goal should be human survival for all, because there are many different ways in which humans could survive, right? You could have a number of people buy themselves another planet and put themselves in a space shuttle, and there would be survival of those humans while the rest of us burn in a hell of our own making in this place. So I mean human survival for all. But I think it's important to teach that in a way that motivates and appeals to the better angels of the nature of our students. I think it's very important to cultivate deep understanding, a sense of urgency with hope and an actual skill. And so I think that requires that our students, first of all, have hope that it's not inevitable that we're going to burn in a hell of our own making. Number two, that actually thriving is going to require that we all engage in building systems, as opposed to demonstrating, complaining, pointing fingers, or saying, well, you know, it's the fault of the system. I do think that we need to develop the agency of our students. And I am very concerned that at this particular time, the response of some educators who see the risks is basically to do something which I believe is toxic and debilitating, which is teach students to complain, but not teach them that they ought to see themselves in the arena, that they are part of the solution, that this is not just about telling, you know, their adults, their parents or something, that we have made a mess. It's about saying, and what are you going to do about it? And helping them, working with them to do something about it. So I think that's how we move forward. And I think we begin with the next step, which is exactly what you're all doing. We don't sit there contemplating the challenges of doing these on a systemic level for all of humanity, but we each begin where we are and we say, okay, for those within my reach, what can I do? And that's what you're doing. And that's why I enjoy coming to these conversations to learn from all of you, because you are the ones that are actually distilling pearls of wisdom from your practice, from your work, from what you're doing. And I think that's how you do it. And then obviously you share what you're learning with other people. Don't just keep it to yourself, you share it with others, and you have hope that in sharing with others, you're going to inspire them, they will challenge you, and that will inspire you. And that is exactly the kind of global movement that the International Commission on the Futures of Education is hopeful that we can animate with this document, provoking precisely the kinds of dialogues that you're having here, that are the ones that are going to translate those big ideas on the report into actual concrete specific ideas about what do we do differently on Monday morning.
Again, it's with profound and deep gratitude, Professor Reimers, that you've been so generous with your time, your humanity, and sharing your thoughts with us over since 2016. I can't wait for next year's conversation. You've been absolutely stupendous. There's so much of value what you said. But at the end of the day, you know, I'm very confident if we can continue these conversations, we can achieve the sustainable development goals in terms of bringing into poverty and hunger by 2030, using technology properly. I think by 2045, we can achieve paradise on earth, a singularity that we can all be proud of. And at the end of the day, why not try if we can't do it? So I think that's all we can do. Again, Professor Reimers, I appreciate you now. Being a loving husband, I know we're going to have to liberate you. You're very, I don't want you to get in trouble.
Great to see you all. It was wonderful to be with you this morning. Thank you for
Thank
your
you so
good
much.
work. Be well.
Thank
Bye.
you. Bye-bye. Bye-bye. Okay, Lindsay. So there's two people I want to, oh, Dr. Ferrara, are you still with us? Oh, good. Okay, fantastic. So I have two people that have made these COLPs absolutely spectacular by sharing and participating. Lark Wen and Joanne, Dr. Joanne Ferrara. I'm going to start with you, Lark. First, I just want to recognize and thank you. And plus, it's 10:37 p.m. in New York and China. So poor Lark, I'm going to go first because she's struggling. I presume you're struggling to stay awake on a Friday night. So Lark, could you, I just want to first of all recognize all the hard work you did in each and every COLP. There wasn't one COLP where we didn't have significant Chinese participation. Thanks in large part to you. And I just wanted to give you a few last words before we head to keep the
Thank you,
conversation.
Joe. Thank you, Joe. And hello, everyone. It's always a pleasure for me to work with every One World friend. So happy to see all of you. I learned a lot from every COLP. Every COLP, I learned so much. So I appreciate your organizing this event. Thank you, Joe. Thank you, Lindsay, Jack, and everybody who is involved. Thank you.
Thank you, Lark. Let's get Lark Winter. She's our unsung Chinese hero. Lark, is Madam Lin still with us, or did she have to sign off? If she wants to say a few words and you translate, great. If not, don't worry. I also want to thank Annie and Vicky, our Chinese team and our Chinese team QI. So Annie, thank you very much. I don't know if your beautiful daughter, I presume she's asleep by now, but she participates in some of our COLPs. Dr. Ferrara, you've anchored the U.S. leg. We need you on that wall. We want you on that wall. And I can't thank you enough for being on that wall. Dr. Ferrara, could you share with us your thoughts?
I think it's amazing. So each time I show up, even though I'm in LA and I had to get up at 5:30 and sign on, I thought, yes, this is worth it. I'm just so honored to see your vision enacted and to take Professor Reimers' 5 principles and really show him how it's done. So we took the theoretical and we made it practical. So we just have to move forward and let's expand. Let's expand the network.
Fantastic. Thank you very much, Dr. Ferrara. Another. I'm going to ask one of our oldest teachers, Jen CD. Jen CD has been one of our oldest teachers. Jack found her. She's been a terrific find from One World. Jen CD from Portchester. Jen.
Hi, how are you? Welcome, everyone. Today is a special day at Park Avenue. It's fun day, and I'm happy to be part of this. It's making my day even more fun. We're definitely expanding next year to continue the One World work that we've been doing for the last decade. Everyone here, as part of our One World After School program, has influenced all of our students in the practices that we're talking about today. We're taking Professor Reimers' Harvard training, and we are sharing it with all of our students from kindergarten all the way to high school. Our global leaders are, they're all graduating and they're getting careers where they're making the world a better place. So I want to thank everyone for your continued practice and for your influence, because we all are going to make the world a better place, and we need it more than any time we've ever had. So thank you, everyone, for allowing us to participate. Peace to everyone and love.
Oh,
Bye-bye.
Anna's translating. So Anna's translating. So I guess I won't be able to have her other than to say, all right, baby, kiss, kiss. All right, love you. Bye-bye. That was to you and my wife. Last night was prom night here. All right, so let me do this. I'm going to turn it over to our new executive director, Lindsay Packle, who none of this would have happened without Lindsay. The presentations are 10 times better. She's even making Jack and I look good, on so many different levels. Lindsay, a few final words from yourself.
Yeah, thank you everybody for being here today, for taking the time out of your morning, out of your night, and for all of the work that you've done throughout the COLP. It was my very first introduction to One World back in December, and you caught me then, and I'm very excited for the work that we'll have to do. And I hope you all have a wonderful night or a wonderful day wherever you are at.
Fantastic. So look, I'm just going to say, as we bring the recording to a close, that again, I just want to profoundly thank the One World team for the fantastic work you've done in Mexico, in the US, in China, and across the world. think we had some Kenyan friends with us today. Hopefully we'll continue to build our opportunities in Kenya. I think we had some Welsh friends with us today. They continue to grow in Wales and across the world. All honesty, you know, we think we're making progress, and we are, but Professor Reimers gave us 10 to 30 ways to move forward and build this and make it better. Now, the other thing Lindsay's done, she's not only making us look good, she's making us get organized. So I know that comes as music to the ears of our teachers that we're going to be organized. So usually we think the summer's a time for rest, and that's not at all. Lindsay and I are taking, One World's going to close down from Sunday till June 20th. That hasn't happened in 10 years. We're going to close down, but come June 20th, we're going to be working 48/7 to plan for the next academic year, to make it even better. And it's going to be a coherent program where you can anticipate each of these activities throughout the year. And next year, when we have this conversation, hopefully we'll be able to measure our impact.